Okay, we need to give the context of this pasuk. So this pasuk is being said at the very, very end of this upcoming week's parsha. So this is after the sin of the golden calf of Chet Egel, after Moshe Rabbeinu goes up, and this actually connects to our what we discussed the last 2 weeks ago, last class. Right, we discussed the fact that there was a 120 days, right? That we discussed that there are 3 periods of 40 days. The first 40, which are the original 40 right after the 10 Commandments were spoken to the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to, after the 10 Commandments was given, Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to the mountain, remains there for 40 days, and is supposed to come down with the first set of tablets. Comes down, sees the Jewish people sinning with the golden calf, destroys the luchot. Then there's a second period of 40 days during which Moshe asks for forgiveness, pleads with Hashem, and receives Hashem's forgiveness. That's the second period of 40 days. And then comes the third period of 40 days where Moshe Rabbeinu is getting the second set of the luchot, and is basically receiving the Torah again, so to say, kind of rebooting the system. So we are now during those 40 days, okay, the third 40 days, and it says the following. Verse 27, Hashem said to Moshe, write these words for yourself. I'm actually interested afterwards in hearing how it's translated by Art Scroll. Write these words for yourself, for according to these words have I sealed a covenant with you and Israel. Then the pasuk goes on to say, he remained there with Hashem for 40 days and 40 nights. He did not eat bread, he did not drink water, and he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. Okay, and then when Moshe descended, etc. But the verse we're looking at is verse 27. I'm just interested in how is it translated by you guys?
Exactly the same.
Same way. Okay. Okay, let's read the verse again, and as usual, we're looking for questions. Hashem said to Moshe, write these words for yourself, for according to these words have I sealed a covenant with you and Israel. Questions?
The words al-pi aren't really explained in the English properly.
Okay, so you're jumping ahead, but that's good because that's good. In Hebrew, okay, you know what? I'll get to that question soon. Before that question, which is actually the central question we'll be discussing, but before we get that, there's something else. Other questions? Yes.
Write this thing for yourself. What does it mean just for him?
Excellent. What is that phrase? What does that mean? Ktov in Hebrew, it's ktov lecha, right? So if we had to translate it literally, it would be write for you. Or more contextually, write for yourself. It's a very strange phrase. It reminds us of, let's say, when Avram Avinu was told, Lech Lecha, go for you, go for yourself. What does that mean? Why doesn't it just say, Ktov? Why doesn't Hashem is saying to Moshe, write down the second set of tablets, right? Or write on the second set of tablets. What does it write for you? What does that mean? Just write. Is this just for Moshe? Very odd phrase, yes.
It seems that it's another covenant. It's not the covenant that it was between Abraham and Hashem. It's a different one because according to this word, I have sealed in covenant with you and Israel. It's like another one that I have with Abraham. It's a different story, but now we have another covenant.
Okay. So I'll take that to the point of when it suddenly says that let's see the language according to these. Where is it? Just a second. According to these words, have I sealed a covenant with you? So I'm going to take your observation, and you're saying, is this a different covenant? So, good question. I'm just going to leave that as a more vague question. What is this covenant? It says the word covenant. Is this the same covenant that existed beforehand? It is just being redone, right? Like because Hashem wanted to kill the Jewish people. There was a difficulty in the relationship. The relationship looked like it was broken, or maybe it was broken. So is this a resealing of the original covenant? Is this a different covenant? Okay, yes. Other questions? Yes.
Just going back to write it for yourself. So if you read it, it's almost like, okay, so just write down that this is the agreement between both of us, and this is for you, so that if I change my mind, you could hold me accountable.
What do you mean?
No, it's like any contract, right? Both parties agree to certain conditions,
right,
and requirements. As long as one party fulfills its obligations, the other party must comply with a set of terms. And for yourself, so each party,
right,
having a contract, it's like tubah, right? So as long as the wife has the tubah, then she has the right, and she can enforce whatever promise.
Right, she can collect on it. So he's saying, he's saying, and it's interesting that you point that out, because I wonder, I don't remember, but I'm not sure that same phrase appears. No, it doesn't. Sorry, that phrase when the first covenant was made, meaning when the first luchot were given, we don't see such a commandment of write this down. Whereas it almost seems like, if I understand correctly what you're saying, as if it says, okay, let's make sure we have this in writing this time around. Like this time around, yes, let's have it in writing. So if afterwards, whatever, like a contract, right? Okay, yes.
There is another one. Brit itchabrit ve'et Israel, and we know where it's at. It's something. There is something inside the et.
Right.
What does it say?
Well, right. That's a question which we will we might get to at the end, but it's an excellent question, which is, why are there two stages? Right. There's two recipients of this covenant. Right. It says,
actually, it's three.
I sealed the covenant with you and Israel. What does that mean? Are those?
And there is et, and there is et. Et, it means there is something else.
Okay. Could be, but I'm saying explicitly, it says it differentiates between the covenant with Moshe and the covenant with Israel. And the question is why? We're not going to really deal with this. Why doesn't it just say with Israel? Moshe is part of Israel. But that we're going to leave for the time being. Yes, I saw a few other hands. Yes.
It refers to Hadvarim Ha'elam. What are these words that he's referring to? Because the pasuk before talks about Pesach with Matzot. So.
Excellent. So it sounds very vague, meaning also the fact that the verse starts off with as if it's starting a new thing. Hashem said to Moshe, meaning this is not a direct continuation. If you look at the verses beforehand, there's all kinds of different mitzvot, and they appear almost at random. There's like different groups. There's about 10 verses about the Chagim, but right beforehand there's a mitzvah of the firstborn animal, and then there's a mitzvah of not eating meat and milk, and they appear in sequence. They either are connected or not connected, but there's no differentiation. There's no stop saying Hashem said to Moshe. Whereas over here, it seems to be a new stage of the conversation, where Hashem says to Moshe, write these words down, because based on these words, I'm making a covenant. And the excellent question is, which words? All of the things that we just said? Or is it specific words? If so, which words? Great, excellent, yes.
Well, it's all on the same theme. According to these words, like you make an agreement with somebody, it's not by these words, it's like it seems to be changing the agreement. There was something about, they had an agreement, God had an agreement with Abraham and then all of his generations. There's an agreement not by words, by, you know, if you're going to get married to somebody, not by, you don't write out a contract. These are the words that I'll stay married to you.
Okay, excellent. You have picked up on our first question, and basically what you're pointing out is, if I were to kind of take what you're saying and take it a little bit more into the text, you're saying the phrase, it's according to these words I'm making the covenant. So wait, is it based on the words that are going to be written, or is it going to be based on the words that are going to be said? And if you look in the verse, twice it says these words, right? And that seems to be superfluous. Why do you need both phrases? Hashem said to Moshe, write these words for yourself, for according to these words. Why not just say, write these words for yourself, for according to them. It should say according to them. There seems to be a big... Yes?
Can we change the meaning of the word hadvarim? Because it comes from the word daber. So it should be according to these utterances, not words. Because it's Kodesh Baruch Hu is uttering these utterances. He's giving over. It's not really words. It's something else.
Okay, so that goes back to your first question, which is going to be the focus. What are the things, words, utterances that the covenant is being made on, and the fact that the phrase, these words, these things, these utterances, is mentioned twice when there doesn't seem to be a good enough justification. This is the type of thing that when we read it, we just kind of gloss over it because it doesn't seem like a very big deal, because sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's just phrasing. But this is the type of thing that the Midrash makes a very big deal out of, especially since the verse here is saying, is basically saying, I'm making a covenant with you on these words. Okay, what? What words? Is it a commandment? Is it what? The covenant is being recreated here. So it should be a very big deal. So why is it being said? What is it? Why is it being said twice? And I want to point out go back to our first question, which was in the Hebrew, and this doesn't translate at all. In the Hebrew, there's a very strange phrase that is used. Okay, so it says, Hashem says to Moshe, Ktov lecha et hadvarim ha'ele, write for yourself, or write for you these words, these utterances. Ki al pi. The phrase al pi is a very strange phrase, and in the most literal way, it means pi comes from the word peh. What does the word peh mean? The word peh means mouth. So if I were to translate this in the most literal way, which wouldn't make sense in English, but it does in Hebrew, if I were to translate in the most literal way, it should be read like this. Hashem said to Moshe, write these words or these utterances, because according to the mouth of these things, or these words, I make a covenant with you in Israel. But the phrase al pi in Hebrew could mean both things. Could mean literally according to the mouth, but it could also mean according to. And this is the type of thing that the Midrash picks up on a lot of time when it looks at something not only contextually, but also in the most literal way. Sometimes the most literal way in which Midrash understands a word removes it from the contextual meaning, which we've seen several times. But sometimes the most literal way in which the Midrash insists on understanding a word, sometimes will bolster and make the contextual understanding much greater, and that's what we're going to see here. So we have a variety of questions on this pasuk. We're going to go, so primarily, why is the phrase, these utterances, these words repeated twice? What exactly is the covenant on? And this tension between, is the covenant on what is being written, or is it based on the words that are being said? Because if it's being written, then it doesn't have to be according to these words. Okay. Those are our main, and we have also the question of why is it that he says write for you or write for yourself? Yes?
That leads to the question I was going to say that I think that central also here is the question of with whom is the contract being made now? Is it just with Moshe? Or is it with Moshe as a representative of the Bnei Yisrael?
Well, okay, you're right. It is an important question, but we're not going to really deal with it so much, maybe at the end, because the verse itself says, to you and Israel, which does seem strange, because just say, for Israel, and Moshe is part of Israel. Why is Moshe being, but for now we're going to leave that on the side. We're going to jump into the Midrash. This Midrash, different Midrashim have different emphases and different focuses. This one is not going to be so much about analyzing the words themselves and the text themselves. It's going to be a little bit more conceptual. Okay. But I think a very, very, very fundamental Midrash. Says the Midrash, Rabbi Elazar says, the majority of the Torah was transmitted in writing, while the minority was transmitted orally. As it states in Hosea, not here, somewhere else, I wrote for him the greater part of my Torah. It's referring to Moshe. I wrote for him the greater part of my Torah. And Rabbi Yochanan says the majority of the Torah was transmitted orally, al peh, while the minority was transmitted in writing. As it states, and this is our verse, for on the basis of these matters, al pi, right? That's the phrase that we said. For on the basis of these matters, the oral matters, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. We don't have any answers to our questions yet, but we have a very, very strange disagreement here. Right? It seems very, very odd disagreement. Okay? What is the disagreement? Is the majority of the Torah what is written in the 5 books? And the oral law is the minority? Or is the majority of the Torah the oral law and the written law is the minority? It seems like a very yes. Sorry, someone wanted to say something? No? Oh, I thought I heard someone. Okay. Now let's continue a little bit, and then we're going to discuss it, or we're going to ask questions on it. Oh, like you want to say something? No. Okay. Looked like okay. Okay. The Midrash continues, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, isn't it written, I wrote for him the greater part of my Torah? Meaning each one of the rabbis brought a proof from a verse for his approach. Right? Rabbi Yochanan brought proof from our verse that the majority of the Torah is the oral, is not what was written down, and what is written down is a minority. It's a very strange concept, but very powerful, very, very harsh thing to say, that everything that is written in the Torah is the minority of the Torah, and he brings proof from our verse, and Rabbi Elazar brings proof from a different verse saying that explicitly says, I wrote for him the greater part of my Torah. So now the Midrash, this is a very common thing that we see in Midrash or in the Talmud, that's going to ask each representative of each opinion how he explains the other side's proof or the other side's argument, which is, this is classic argumentation. Okay. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, isn't it written, I wrote for him the greater part of my Torah? It's an amazing answer. So his answer is, this verse is not a statement, rather a rhetorical question expressing bewilderment. did I write for him the greater part of my Torah? Could it be? And according to Rabbi Elazar, isn't it written, on the basis of these matters I have made a covenant with you and with Israel? So what does Rabbi Elazar do with our verse that uses the phrase, I made a covenant with you on the oral, al peh, on the oral part of Torah? So he answers, that is due to the fact that it is more difficult to learn. He says, why is the covenant with the Jewish people primarily on the oral law? Because it's more difficult to study the oral and understand, or more difficult to study, to learn the oral law. Okay, before we get into it, let's see, do we have an answer based on this Midrash so far? The Midrash goes on. Based on what we saw in the Midrash so far, do we have answers to some of our questions? We do. We have a question, we have an answer to why are there two phrases of these words? Why are there two phrases of these words, or these utterances?
One is for written, one is for oral.
Right. The first part of the verse, where he says, write these things, is referring to the written law. The parts of the Torah, the 5 books, whether you understand that it was all written at that moment, or whether you understand, as Rambam understands it, it was written in stages throughout the 40 years in the desert. But that's referring to Moshe, you should write. But then he goes on, according to the Midrash, according to the way the Midrash understands it, he then goes on to say, but the covenant I'm making with you, write down this stuff, but the main covenant that I'm making to you, the main aspect of the covenant, is based on what you're not writing down, and rather what I'm giving you now orally, and that is what I'm making a covenant with you for. So we have an answer to, again, I know that, and this is what we always do, the Midrash provides us, or the commentator, the Midrash provides us with an answer, but very, very often that answer opens us up to much bigger and maybe even more difficult questions. We'll get there in a moment. So we have an answer to that question, and we have an answer to the tension that we found between the writing and the al peh, and why is it that there's a contract on words, because referring to the oral law. Okay, now questions. Anyone have any difficulty with what the Midrash said? The logic of it, the reason of it, anything. Difficulties with it?
The only difficulty that I have is that where Rabbi Elazar writes in his last statement, that is due to the fact that it is more difficult to learn.
Okay.
Why is the oral law more difficult to learn than the written law? I find that it's more difficult to understand the nuances in the written sometimes than the oral.
Okay, excellent. Excellent question. You're saying, why is it that Rabbi Elazar says that it is more difficult to learn the oral law? Good. Other questions? Other difficulties with this Midrash? I think there's a lot. It's a very strange Midrash. Very strange.
If you're looking at making a contract with somebody, you said, the words I'm going to say, that's going to be the basis of the contract. There's lots of misinterpretation. I heard it this way. The emphasis was on this, on that. Your tone meant this, and I think it meant that. Most of the communication verbally is open. What do we say?
Please, Ron. Please finish that sentence. It is open to interpretation. Good. So
and saying the idea that God would be saying, I'll make a contract, a covenant with you based on how you or I or somebody else interpret something, is a can of worms, because I think the contract's still valid. I'm going to take you to court because my interpretation was that was more important than that. I heard it in your voice. You meant that. No, I meant that. Well, that's your interpretation. We'll go to a judge or whatever. Written, that, if you want to build a covenant on written stuff, I got it. Okay, we put it down on paper. We agreed that this is what we meant. We have it here. It's not my interpretation. So to me, it's very problematic to say the covenant's based on amorphous interpretations.
Okay, excellent.
I'm just curious why they don't pick up on the more obvious proof that follows immediately after this verse. That's regardless of how tiny you write, you can't fit everything on 2 tablets.
Right.
And that's all he got, according to the text.
So he's saying under the understanding that what is being written is, at least at this stage, what is being in this scene. When he says to him, "Write for you," he's referring to, based on the context, you're right, the 2 tablets, and just simply, like how much can you write on the 2 tablets?
40 days.
What?
Like no, I mean, like, yeah, you can write, but you can write a lot in 40 days.
I don't know. No, I'm not sure, because you're chiseling. No, I'm not sure that's true. Yeah. Because you're chiseling. I'm not you're chiseling it. So I don't know. I imagine it takes time to chisel. Wait. So your question is what again?
No, I'm saying is why do they not bring up the explanation that he only got 2 tablets out of it, and so it must be that. That's right.
It must. Right. You're saying so. So you're saying Rabbi Yochanan could prove not just from the literal words, but from the context, that quite obviously this covenant that's being agreed upon here is not going to be based just on what Moshe writes now. Good question. No, yeah, good question. Rabbi Yochanan could use that as a. I think it's a good question. If I had to try to answer it, maybe I'm not sure how good of an answer this is. Both Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan are quite obviously making a bigger deal. They're creating a fundamental disagreement, which we yet have to figure out what lay at the bottom of this. They're obviously creating. There's a fundamental disagreement between them on the relationship between the oral law and the written law, and each one is using a verse to back up their fundamental approach. But I think you would agree with me that I don't think either one of them does a very good job at rebuffing the other one's proof. I don't know. Would you agree with me? I mean, look at how does Rabbi Yochanan rebuff Rabbi Elazar's Rabbi Elazar? It's like the worst rebuttal. He says to him, "Oh, that's not a statement. That's a question. You could say that about anything. You could say, well, when it says thou shalt not murder, well, that's not a statement. That's a bewilderment. That's a question. Thou shalt not murder." Like what kind of what kind of rebuttal is that? That's one of my personally one of my many questions on this. If I'm looking even within the logic of this discussion, okay, and I'm not looking at anything outside, I'm just saying, okay, to what degree within the context of this argument that's taking place between these 2 rabbis, to what degree are their arguments to each other making sense from their own perspective? So Rabbi Yochanan's rebuttal, I mean, come on, it's not a rebuttal. He says, look, I'm quoting a verse for you that says, I wrote for him the greater part of my Torah. And he says, no, you don't see, there's a question mark there. I mean, it's not very solid. And the truth is, yes.
Can I ask something? Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan, are they sitting in Babylon or in Israel?
Israel.
Both of them?
Yeah.
Approximately what period of time?
They're sitting. Yeah. After the destruction. The generation or 2 after the destruction.
So maybe just one of them understands that the oral law is going to keep Jews busy.
Wait, we'll get there. Yes.
And from what I read, both of them agree that the covenant is based on the oral law. They only disagree whether the majority is in writing or orally.
I don't know. I don't know. Where do you see that? Where do you see that Rabbi Elazar doesn't say anything about that? Rabbi Elazar is quoting a completely different verse.
No, but in the second part, so Rabbi Yochanan says, on the basis of all these matters, I've made a covenant. And in the second part of Rabbi Elazar, it says, on the basis of these matters, I've made a covenant with you and with Israel. This is due to the fact that it is more difficult to learn. So it's not based on the oral law.
Could be, but here could be. Okay, but yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So that's what I see. To me, they're in agreement that the covenant is based on the oral law, but they're in disagreement what the majority is in writing.
Okay,
or is it
so here we go. Okay, we're now ready for our first plunge. Okay, because we have all these questions. Okay, some of them are more technical about how the inner logic of the discussion makes sense, and some of it is about the fundamental idea, some of the more fundamental ideas of what is really going on here. So here's the question. Let's assume you're right, that they both agree that the covenant is on the oral law, okay, based on the most literal way in which this verse should be read. And wait, before I continue, I just want to make a distinction, and just for the purposes of this discussion, for this class, what do we mean when we say the written law, and what do we mean when we say the oral law? For our purposes right now, we're going to say that the written law is the words that are written in the book of the 5 books. Okay? That, when we say the written law, the words that are written in there. And the oral law is everything else. Mishnah, Gemara, Halacha, Midrash, everything else. Okay? For our purposes, that's what we're defining now, because it seems to me that is what the Midrash is talking about. That's okay. So let's assume that you're right, that both opinions, both Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan, both agree that the covenant is made based on the oral law. Okay? So here's another question we didn't ask, which is, what difference does it make? What difference does it make if the majority is the oral or majority is the written? What's the difference? We treat both the same. We supposedly believe that we received both, and you can't have one without the other. What's the difference? What meaning? There's a disagreement here to the point that each one is bringing a verse to prove their opinion, and each one is giving a pretty lame excuse to rebuff the other person's proof. What significance is it? Who cares? What difference does it make? Yes.
On the written law, there seems to be less arguments afterwards than there is on the oral law. The written law is much more clear and concise. The oral law has interpretation to it. And
okay.
That's where the difference is. The difficulty.
Take it a step further, and therefore
there's an open to interpretation.
So you're saying that Rabbi Elazar wants to minimize the area of interpretation, and he's preferring to see and to view Torah as being less open to interpretation and more clear-cut, whereas Rabbi Yochanan, by saying that the majority of the Torah is the oral law, the oral Torah, and the minority is what is written, he has a view of Torah which is more open to interpretation. I agree. Yes, I agree, and I think I'll expand on that in a moment. Yes.
As I see, the oral law separates us, and the written law, Torah, unites us. Because if you have oral, you can give all these different interpretations and Minhagim coming after, and it's just one big mishmash.
And therefore.
And then Torah just unites us. It's rest. It's
so you agree. So you're continuing what we said before, which is that. So you're saying two perspectives here. One, which an attempt to minimize the area and the areas and the extent to which interpretation interpretation can come in, and the other opinion. Okay. So, wait, did someone else have their hand up? Yeah.
Yeah. I find this hugely problematic in that if you look at what has defined Jews, and the covenant is a underpinning. I mean, to say that we're united because of Shabbat, or we're united because we eat this kind of food or don't eat that kind of food, which is really how Jews have been united. You go around the world to find kosher food, so you go to Chabad and these different places, so we're united that way. But if the covenant is based on the oral tradition, not the written tradition, then we've been betting on the wrong horse. We've been spending too much time doing things that are black and white. Pork is not kosher, shellfish is not kosher, fish with skins and tails are kosher.
Right.
But that's not the covenant. That's not what God didn't make the agreement with us, if that's true, based on the things we're interpreting, which are black and white because written, versus interpreting, which is the oral tradition that has a lot more. That's why I agree with that statement. This is due to the fact that it's more difficult to learn. Of course it's more difficult because what's hard to learn about what's kosher and not kosher? Very easy to learn. You can teach it to a 3-year-old.
Yes.
But when you get into this other territory, oral, then now and that's what the covenant's on. I think it looks like we've been riding the wrong horse for a long time.
Okay. So far it seems quite monolithic. Yes, Oleg.
No, it's clear that they see different or assign a different value to written and oral tradition. Because if they weren't, then there would be no discussion. And I think you mentioned before. So the punishment for writing in the book was death, just because nobody would be able to distinguish between the actual writing and the addition or thoughts on the writing. So one, as was said, one is written and therefore cannot be changed, and the other one is not even open to interpretation, but also open to addition, subtraction, etc. Therefore, if you have something that nobody can agree on, or there are many opinions on how to approach it, then you would rely on this less as a source of final judgment. Let's put it this way.
Right.
If you go to court and nobody can say what the actual meaning of the law is, then there's no law.
Okay. So I'm happy. You all seem to be more or less in agreement, and you all seem to be, I guess, advocates, I guess, of, and I think you've all made the argument, which I think is standing behind what Rabbi Elazar says. He says, listen, the majority of things are set and clear and done. And there's just a little bit extra of, for the purpose of interpretation and some extra stuff. And I think, but Rabbi Yochanan here, and we'll see as the Midrash continues, Rabbi Yochanan becomes the main opinion, and Rabbi Elazar is not mentioned again. Rabbi Yochanan is the one who becomes the central opinion. I want to, before we continue with the Midrash though, because I'm hoping to build this in stages, is I asked beforehand, what difference does it make? Which one is the majority and which one is the minority? So you guys verbalize, I think, very well that, whatever, if you say that the majority is the oral, then you've opened up more and possibly too much space for interpretation, and therefore a less of a solid foundation for the covenant and for the certainty and for the truth. But I think that inside their two opinions, I think we can try to identify how they see what the main characteristic, or what some of the characteristics are of the oral law. Because let's look again at, according to Rabbi Yochanan, isn't it written? So he says the following, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, isn't it written, I wrote for him the greater part of my Torah? How does he rebuff this? He says the following. This verse is not a statement. Rather, look at what he says. A rhetorical question expressing bewilderment. Did I write for him the greater part of my Torah? How do you understand what is Rabbi Yochanan trying to say here? How does Rabbi Yochanan understand that verse? What does it mean? A rhetorical question of expressing bewilderment. Did I write for him the greater part of my Torah? Is it possible? That's how he understands the verse. Is it possible that I wrote for him the majority of the Torah? Not possible. Impossible. What does that tell us about how Rabbi Yochanan sees the Torah? When he comes and says, could it possibly be? It's impossible that God would write the majority of Torah. Not possible. Why? Why is it so clear to him? It's impossible. What?
Because God is infinite. So how Torah can be finite?
Okay. So you're saying because the Torah, excellent. You're saying because the Torah is infinite. Meaning, it's not possible to write forget about all of it. It's not possible to write the majority of it down. Because it is, the word infinite is a bit of a bombastic word. So, I'm going to use something simple. I'll say, the Torah is too big. I don't know. I don't know if his thinking is it's too detailed, or is it too in depth. I don't know. But the way in which he's phrasing it, is it possible? Of course, it's not possible. It's a ridiculous notion. So he sees Torah, and the thing upon which the covenant was made, on this aspect of the fact that the Torah is big, is huge, is boundless, and cannot, even the majority of it, cannot be written down. Not that God doesn't want, it can't, it's not possible to write even the majority of it down. Wait, just 1 second. And let's look for a second, what is the main characteristic that Rabbi Elazar prescribes to the oral law? That is due to the fact that it is more difficult to learn. So he says, why is it that the covenant was made on the oral law? Not because it's so big, it's not so big, it's less, it's smaller than the written law. It's because it's so difficult to learn it. If it's smaller than the written law, why is it so difficult to study, to learn? What would make it so difficult? Thoughts? I'm asking us to try to say something. I know that I said this is more conceptual because I'm asking for a question, for an answer that is not written in the text. So it's important for me to say that. This is kind of external to what the Midrash itself is saying, but I'm digging a little bit, but beneath the surface, but I think it's still close enough.
Maybe because it's a lot of interpretation can be.
And therefore what?
And that if you're looking for truth, it's more difficult to find the truth.
Why?
Because you don't see the yard behind the trees.
Wait, no, but it's small. It's not that much. It's a little bit. Yeah, so why is it so hard?
Everyone comes with his own interpretation, and who knows what's the truth?
Excellent. So the difficulty, I agree. Who knows what the truth is? Because the majority of Torah, we know exactly what it is. That's the written law. We know what yes, what no. And now we have this little space called the oral law, and it's so difficult to know, to make sure it is still saying things that are true, that are right. Rabbi Yochanan is not concerned with that. Rabbi Yochanan is infatuated almost with how big the oral law is, how much room there is in it. Whereas Rabbi Elazar's feeling seems to be the opposite. Any area which is for interpretation is scary. I know I'm saying something that he's not saying. So I'm putting words into his mouth. Okay, that's important for me to make that distinction. So it's almost as if, how do I know that little few things? How do I know I'm getting it right, so to say? And that's exactly that's exactly what you guys were saying before. You seem to be Rabbi Elazaritz, in the sense that that anywhere where there's room for interpretation, that seems to be a destabilizing element. And I think that's exactly what Rabbi Elazar thinks and he believes. And therefore, no. The area that we're certain about, where there's no room for interpretation, or it's clear, or the boundaries, at least the boundaries are completely clear, that's the majority. The majority of what we do and what we believe in and what we go by is set and clear, and it is what it is, and that is it. And okay, there's this little area where we need to interpret things, or we need to apply them, but that should be left to be as small as possible, and that's really, really difficult. And that's the covenant, to make sure you get it right, and your interpretations and your applications don't go off too much, and don't. But Rabbi Yochanan's, and we'll see soon the extrapolation of Rabbi Yochanan's intuition seems to be the exact opposite, and I'll prove it to you. Let's continue with the Midrash. Rabbi Yehuda bar Nachmani expounded as follows. It is written, write these matters, right? That's our verse, and it is written later, for on the basis of these matters, right, al-pi. How can these texts be reconciled? Ron, this was your question. Beginning of the verse you say right, and then in the continuation of the verse you say, orally. So how can these two be together? So says Rabbi Yehuda bar Nachmani, matters that were written, you may not express them orally. And matters that were taught orally, you may not express them in writing. I'll read that again. Matters that were written, what?
Why?
That's my question. Why?
Why?
So let's start. Wait. Let's start with the second. Things that were taught orally, you may not express them in writing, meaning you're not allowed to write them down.
You've already opened the can of worms.
What? No, it's saying no. Wait, it's not saying that the oral, the interpretations, the applications, the additional edicts and laws that are made. It's not to come and say that they're not true. It's to say, but saying you're not allowed to write them down. They need to remain oral. Now, here's the question: in order to understand why these two strange prohibitions, what is the main difference between something that is oral, an agreement or a decision that remains oral, versus one that is written down? What are the main differences between those two types of decisions or statements?
If you don't trust each other, you have to write down.
Okay. So there's an aspect of trust. What else?
Oral, you can change. If
Excellent.
you see something
Excellent.
It's wrong, you
Excellent.
can change.
Excellent. That's what I'm looking for. Oral is dynamic. If it remains oral, you guys pointed out beforehand, it's open to interpretation, and you pointed that out as a negative. Over here, it does not seem like a negative. Open to interpretation, malleable, changeable, dynamic, is the essence of the oral law. That is what it is. It is the dynamic aspect of Torah. And something which is written, that's it. Once it's written, it's final. It's finite. Once it's written, that's it. It's stuck. Yes.
Is this so the portion of Torah that we understand as the living Torah is actually the oral law?
Correct.
Not written, because it metamorphoses, it changes.
Correct. Continue reading. Look what the Medrash, this is all the same Medrash. Rabbi Elazar has been forgotten. Rabbi Yochanan says, the Holy One, blessed be He, made a covenant with the Jewish people only for the sake of the matters that were transmitted orally. As it stated, for on the basis of these matters, al peh, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. This is unbelievable. Says Rabbi Yochanan, only on the oral law. There's another medrash. There's another medrash that I did not bring because I knew we wouldn't have enough time. Bli neder, God willing, I will send it to you. Where it actually says something, takes this idea even further. And it says, listen, the written, Hashem says to Moshe, I know that in the future, the other nations will take from you the written law, and they will adopt it as well. And therefore, I don't want to go into this right now, it's just amazing, but I'll send it to you guys. And therefore, the covenant with you will be not on the written which everyone, all the nations of the world can and will share. This is written 1700 years ago. Okay? This is definitely pre-Muslim. This is at best at the very beginning of the really beginnings of Christianity, when it wasn't Christianity, it was just a bunch of Jews who were doing one of many sects. Okay? But I want to put that on the side for a second, just to show you how far it goes. Says Rabbi Yochanan, only for the oral law am I making a covenant for you. And it's a staggering, it's an unbelievable statement. And I think it is exactly what you just said, which is because the difference between the written Torah and the oral Torah, because we call it different Torah, it's not different Torahs. It's the written aspect of the Torah versus the oral aspect of the Torah. It's not two different books. It's not two different entities. Okay? Because if we did not believe in the oral, dynamic, malleable, changeable, applicable aspect of the Torah, it would not be something that could accompany us for thousands of years throughout hundreds of generations, different lifestyles, different locations, the ability to take, meaning the eternal aspect of the Torah, the thing that makes it part of our identity and not just a stagnant book and list of laws, is the fact that it is dynamic, and the thing that allows it to be dynamic, malleable, changeable, is that it's oral. Now, there's a big question that should come up here, which is, but the oral law is no longer oral. It hasn't been for 1600 years. We wrote it down in the Mishnah, in the Gemara. We codified what is not supposed to be codified. And I'm going to say something here which I know is very drastic. Okay? We'll continue just a tiny bit and you'll see. And it's a very drastic and dramatic thing I'm about to say. But first let's see the Medrash. Yes, Oleg?
I just want to say something, not to contradict you, but just opposite you. So you present this as a positive, which is obviously is, adaptability of oral tradition to modern circumstances and ability to evolve.
Yes.
So, however, if you step back and look at the law as an agreement, a covenant between two parties, with that ability to change or amend certain things on one side means that the other side has the same ability. Meaning that the covenant that was made, so as soon as you start saying that, well, it's not really this, but we now know that it must be not Y but X, so you no longer have the same ability to say, well, but the other side will stick to whatever was promised. Because this was promised, we can evolve and change and adapt, but the other side will stay constant.
So what?
That's one of them.
Right. So what you hint? If I understand where you're going with this, you're hinting towards the Christian, for instance, the Christian claim of a new covenant and God changing His mind.
That would be
Right.
a continuation of it. But also the other aspect of this is that we assume that all the changes that and new interpretations are done in good faith, and not to amend the law to fit the circumstances so that make your own situation or
okay.
Suitable.
That's an excellent. That's a huge question, which is how does one know that the way they are applying something or interpreting something is not just based on their own whim, their weakness, their excellent question, big one, which we'll have to find a different time to deal with. My short answer to that is that, and this is really off topic, my short answer to that is that individuals will do all kinds of things for all kinds of reasons, but again, this is off topic. My personal strong belief, based on seeing how Torah and Halacha has developed, is that the Jewish people as a whole has a certain wisdom of what to adopt, what to accept, and what to let fall on the wayside. And I think that I just want to stay on topic, okay? Because I promised to say something very, very dramatic, okay? Because the question I asked was that if the oral law or the oral aspect is supposed to be the one that creates the malleability and the dynamic aspect of Torah, which can change and adapt, then the moment the Torah is written, the oral law starts to be written, what happens to that? Let's continue. The Midrash is aware of this. The Midrash continues, it was said, maybe new things are different, as we see that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish learned on Shabbat from a book of Agadah. They were reading from a book. How could this be? They were reading a book of Agadah. Agadah is like Midrash, or stories of Midrash. How could they be reading from a book? Someone wrote it down. You just said you're not allowed to write it down. So how could these two great Amoraim in the 4th century, how could they be reading from a book of Agadah? And they extrapolated. This is a verse, I forget where it's taken from I think from Tehillim, from Psalms, I think. A time to do for Hashem, violate your Torah. The verse comes and says that sometimes in order to serve Hashem, you need to violate the Torah, which in itself is a very, very scary sentence. Sometimes in order to serve Hashem, you need to violate the Torah. Sometimes in order to serve the purpose of the lawmaker, you have to break his law. Sometimes you have to break the law to keep the intention of the law. And then they went on to explain, it is better So this verse is the one that's quoted all the time. This is the source for the fact that the oral law was written down. It is better, look at this is unbelievable. It is better that one letter of the Torah be uprooted than the Torah be forgotten from Israel. It is better that one letter of the written Torah be erased than the oral law should be forgotten. And if you think that's shocking, right, so it's saying here that obviously there was a situation where there was a danger of the oral law being lost. This has to do with the destruction, as you said before. This has to do with the Jewish people no longer, being dispersed, being persecuted, losing sovereignty, not having prophecy, a lot of different things that, because when everyone is together and there's a political, spiritual center, and then the oral traditions remain, they get passed down, they stay alive, they have that dynamic aspect. Certain things that are no longer relevant can be left on the wayside. Certain things can be left to be forgotten. Certain things can change naturally and grow and in an organic way, based on changing situations, the way people's understanding of reality changes, the way logic develops, because it's all oral. But that's when there is a center. That's when everyone is together. But when we start to become dispersed, say Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, and many others said this over and over again during that generation and the future ones, that in order for the oral aspect and the traditions and the laws and the rules and the interpretations that have been with us for 1,000 years not be forgotten, it is better to uproot a word from the written Torah to keep the traditions alive. Now, if you think that's shocking, the next one will make you fall from your chair. Right for you. Remember what we said, the first part of the pasuk. K'tov lecha, right for you. We said, why is this right for you, for Moshe? This is unbelievable midrash. The ministering angels began to say before the Holy One, blessed be He, you give Moshe permission to write what he wants? Because you were saying, right for you. And to say to Israel, I gave the Torah, I am the one who wrote it and gave it to you? It's like, Hashem, you're giving him too much leverage, too much room, too much independence. You ready? Look at this. The Holy One, blessed be He, said to them, Moshe would not do such a thing. And even if he did, he's trustworthy. Do you see what he said? The Midrash is saying he wouldn't change anything. He wouldn't take the credit for it, and he wouldn't change anything. But you know what? Even if he does, it's okay. I trust him. It's unbelievable. And just 1 second. Just as it says, right? And now it just brings a proof that Moshe is called by Hashem, called trustworthy. Not so is my servant Moshe. He is trusted throughout my household. Throughout my household, meaning even throughout my Torah. Now wait. Before we take some comments, I wanna, because we saw a lot of different things here. We kind of were all over the place a little bit, as we are sometimes. But I want to go. I promised a dramatic statement that the oral aspect of the Torah is supposed to be the one that was intended to be dynamic, malleable, changeable, adaptable, and that to some degree, when the oral law or the oral aspect of the Torah started to be written down, its malleability, its adaptability was restricted. And you see it each stage, when something was written down, it became canonized. The Mishnah was the first part that was written down, and that's it. From the moment the Mishnah was written down, that becomes unchangeable. We become stuck with it. It's become almost the same, basically the same status as the written Torah. And then the Gemara the same. And what you have is, each generation since then has started to write down and codify, literally codify, the next stage of the oral law. And what that has caused is a restriction, a continuous restriction and minimalization almost of Torah. And the ability and the dynamic aspect of Torah, to me at least, throughout the generations, seems to have decreased. Look at what the Midrash is saying. Moshe, he's not going to say something of his own. He's not going to change the, right? You give Moshe permission to write what he wants. And Hashem says, he's not going to do it. But even if he does write whatever he wants, it's okay, I trust him. What Chachamim and the Midrash, this is a continuation to an extreme, almost to an absurd, of what Rabbi Yochanan said, is that the covenant with the Jewish people was only on the oral aspect of the law, because the written law is very easy. It's very simple. Here's a book. Read it. You're a Jew, you could read it. You're a Christian, you could read it. You're a Muslim, you can read it. You're a biblical scholar, you can read it. And you can basically understand it. Thou shalt not murder. Pretty clear. That is not, meaning the Torah was given and is access to everyone. And it's done a pretty good job at transforming humanity and being accepted by very large parts of humanity. Can you guys still see me? Hello? Okay, we seem to be having some technical difficulties. Can you guys hear me? Just 1 second. We seem to be having some technical difficulties. We are almost at the end of the class, but even so, those of you who are watching either live or going to watch this at a different time, just a moment. We're almost done, but there's a few very important points that still I'm hoping to share. Okay, so I think I will now. I'll just continue with. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds. Okay, I guess not. Okay, so I'm going to continue. Okay, so I'm going to continue just with those of you who are watching online, and hopefully you guys in Toronto are able to see me through Facebook now. So what I was saying, the dramatic thing I was saying, is that the way in which halacha, the oral law, or a large part of what we now identify as Torah, so much of what we have with us today, which is really the result of the oral aspect of the Torah, meaning the interpretations, the extrapolations of the Torah, or even more so the applications of the words of the written Torah to the changing realities, or the additional laws, rules, edicts, fences that were added on throughout the generations. They all just remained because they were codified, and once they're written, then it's understood to be obligating. It's understood to be sealed, to be a done deal, to be unchangeable, because it's written as an obligatory source which has gained a certain status, versus a living tradition, which in its nature, there's only a certain amount that can be transmitted and kept and remained and inculcated within culture and identity. And each generation, certain things are adopted, certain things remain, certain things become the core and they kind of stay. Other things fall on the wayside as they become irrelevant because of different lifestyle, different situations, and all kinds of different things. But that dynamic, that ability to be dynamic, or that dynamicia, is what it means that we understand that Torah is eternal. That is its aspect. And therefore, for the last 1,600 years, we have done something because we had no choice, as we were dispersed and did not have central power of power. It's not a matter of just of physical power. It has to do centrality of identity. As we lived dispersed all over the world as minorities, as spiritual minorities, cultural minorities, and therefore there's something that has gone wrong, but because there was no choice, it's something unnatural to the original plan of how Torah was given and was supposed to develop, something that is off. That does not mean to say, I'm not trying to come and say that, okay, we should stop keeping, here's a list of all the things we should stop doing. That's not what I'm saying, God forbid. It is already, these things are already part of who we are. But it means that there's a process that we already are starting to see in Israel. And I think that we will see more and more over the next few decades and centuries, Bezrat Hashem, where as the Jewish people have returned and continue to return to Israel, and to an original sense of identity, of security, not only physical security, cultural, spiritual, religious security and certainty, and almost like without the pressure and the disbursement and the little bit here, a little bit there, where the dynamic aspect of the traditions will return. In a different time, I'd be happy to share examples of where this is already happening, of things, people from different cultures marrying each other and certain things, and people who are confident in their religious observance and their Jewish cultural identity, to the point where they are beginning to pick and choose what yes to do and not to do, but not because of comfort, because they don't like this, but they are very observant and very religious and very passionate in certain areas which are religious in nature, but in others that really, and this is something that is happening from the bottom up. This is not something that is happening, or I believe should happen, from the top down for a variety of reasons, but it's starting to happen from the people themselves, and it's a larger discussion for a different time. But if I were to summarize what we've seen, is, like I said, this is a little more conceptual. But we see here that it does still, the machloket and the disagreement between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan does begin from a difficulty in the verse. We ourselves identify the tension between what is written and what is being said, between between a covenant which seems to be centralized on one type, and the tension between the two. And then based on that, we see Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan turning these two aspects in the verse into something which is a much larger discussion, and each one of them is coming to this discussion, into the disagreement. It seems to be with a preconceived notion about what the central aspect of Torah is, or if more specifically about is the interpretation aspect of Torah. Is it something which is more scary and should be with intent to minimize it, or no, that is the essence of all of what it's about. That is the as Rabbi Yochanan said, is it possible to write everything? You can't even think that it's possible to write even the majority of it. How can you possibly say such a thing? And then Rabbi Yochanan going on to continue to come and say, only for that, because that is what makes us unique, our ability to live in a dynamic, changeable, to live. Life is dynamic, life changes, life adapts, life develops organically. To be able to live Torah, to make it a living Torah which is not stagnant and is not stuck. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says the minority of Torah is the unchangeable aspect, the foundation, which is unchangeable, but the majority of what it is, of who we are, of our identity, is something which is life. It is a living part of who we are, and therefore it must be able to be dynamic and malleable and changeable and adaptable. And therefore the oral aspect of it and the dynamic of oral transmission and inculcation and mimetic behavior is what enables it to be something which is living and dynamic and organic. And I added on my own 2 cents, which is also what we saw with Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, that something of that was lost from us when we went into Galut, and we lost our communal identity, our communal ability to live as a community that keeps the traditions alive and dynamic, and part of a living communal organism, and therefore we were forced to kind of cut certain portion, certain aspect of the ability of our truth to be organic, living entities, a part of our living aspects of our identity, and hopefully now in the last generation, as we return to the certainty and to the confidence of the communal identity, national communal identity, we already do, and we will continue to see a return to a more dynamic, organic, responsive application of the Torah. A lot to think about. It opens up many questions and discussions, and I regret that we're not that I can't be responsive, although we've kind of gone long enough. I'll just kind of, I think that last part of the Midrash, where Chachamim come and put into Hashem's mouth these frightening words that, I trust Moshe won't say things, won't write whatever he wants in the Torah, but even if he does, it's okay, I trust him. It's an astounding statement by Chazal, by the rabbis, on how they view the human input, or the relationship between Am Yisrael, Moshe in this case, but Am Yisrael, and the written law which was given to us by Hashem. Absolutely astounding. A lot to think about. Shavua Tov.